All right, well, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you all to the next edition of the concert series here at the Holland Land Office Museum. We're very excited to have back again Dwyer to do some more Civil War music for us. So we're going to go back 160 years and jam out for a little while. So he's actually doing one of his newest program, which is Music of the Women of the Civil War. So something a little different than if you came and saw him last year. So we're very excited to have him back. So Don, take it away.
Good evening. I'm Dwyer. I'm from Buffalo. I usually start off with a joke that I'm doing music from the Civil War rather than Irish music, which is what I did for 30 years, because they don't throw things at you, at Civil War things. Until a couple of, well, that's right, a couple of jobs ago, presentations ago, a woman in the back said, "Not yet." So I kept my eye on her. This program is the Women of the American Civil War. Women who were, the songs are either written by the women, and some of them are written by them, or inspired by them. Now the women's movement, if you will, started in 1848, but it took off from there. And magically through the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, women were taking leadership roles in things like abolition societies and drinking, the teetotalers type of thing, as well as women's suffrage. And of course that didn't happen until 1919. It took that long. But women were getting more and more up front and were being recognized for what they did. Now this first song is a little silly song, and it's called "Wait for the Wagons." But it's a song that I know, even though I've never performed it until I did this. And it's about a guy. It's about a guy who he wants to marry this girl. He's got it bad, but she's not buying what he's selling. And he is giving her, in this song, he's giving her every reason why she should be married to him. Okay, this was written by a gentleman named Simon Wiesenthal in 1850. I don't know where it happened, but it was finally published in 1851 in New Orleans. And what's historical about it, besides the fact that the melody has been used up until, well, I've heard it before, so these late days. It was used, and the words were changed. The Confederates took it. "Wait for the Confederate wagons" was their take on it. This gentleman in the song is a farmer, and this woman Phyllis is the object of his affection. But he's a farmer, and he's got a farm apparently. And what makes this more interesting is it's based on a wagon, and back in the 1870s, 1880s, the Studebaker Wagon Company, big company, this is what they did. They made farm wagons. And if you bought a Studebaker farm wagon, you got this big color picture of a man with a farm wagon, and there's the farmer, and there's the wife. So that obviously was the inspiration. These are the three things that were coming together in this song. Won't you come with me, my Philistine, climb that mountain tree, where the mountains are the sweetest. Won't you come along with me? And every Sunday morning I'll be there by your side. So wait for the wagon, we'll all take a side. Oh, wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, and we'll all get aboard. I'll wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, and we'll you'll listen to my story, it will fill my heart. Jump in the wagon and we'll all take a start. Now jump in the wagon, wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, and we'll all take a ride. Can you believe my Phyllis dear, that might with all is well can make you half as happy as I with youth and health? We'll have a little farm, a horse, a pig, and a cow, and you can mind the dairy while I will mind the plow. Wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, and we'll all get aboard. As we travel on life's journey, we'll travel till we stop, and if there is no trouble, we'll find the happy top. So come with me, my Phyllis, my dear, my lovely bride. Get in the wagon and we'll all take a ride. Wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, and we'll all take a ride. Wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, wait for the wagon, and we'll all take a ride. Thank you. You know all the words.
Yeah. I learned it younger.
What's the next one?
My grandpa loved it.
I've heard the song all my life. It's the first time I ever saw words to it. This next song was written by Ethel Lynn Beers. Now, and it happened early in the war. It became extremely popular. It had the advantage of happening early in the war. The war started in earnest in April of 1861. First big land battle in the East was Bull Run, the first Bull Run, which the Union really got its rear end kicked. They snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. But they were disorganized. There was a reason for it. It didn't just happen. They were disorganized. So this was in July. Early in September, President Lincoln named George McClellan, the general of the Army of the Potomac. Army of the Potomac being the biggest Union army, and it was about 125,000 soldiers at that time. And he brought a lot to the table. He was a former engineer. He was an executive at the railroad, and he graduated from West Point High in his class. So he was a very smart man. And another of his positives were his soldiers loved him. Now he's a pretty arrogant guy and a blue blood, if you will. So why would he, especially the Irish soldiers, who were a mess, but they loved him. Well, you didn't have to think long for why they loved him. He kept them out of harm's way.
Yep.
He didn't engage in battle if he could help it. And it drove Lincoln to distraction. He used to refer to the Army of the Potomac as McClellan's bodyguard.
Yeah.
So he didn't have a lot of, he was starting to lose respect. But he was a dandy. He was living in a nice townhouse in Washington, D.C. instead of in the camps with his soldiers. And he had a magnificent horse, a newly tailored uniform, and he was a great organizer, though. And he had that army snapped into a fighting unit. And they never fought. Now, he would occasionally, one of his duties was he had to sit down with journalists, and they would interview him. And eventually, he would say as little as he could, but at the end of the interviewer's got to ask the question, how's the war going, General? And he would always say the same thing, all quiet along the Potomac. No matter how things were going, all quiet along the Potomac. Trying to lower expectations as much as he possibly could. Well, Ethel Lynn Beers, as I mentioned, was born in 1827 in Goshen, New York. Married to an older man. She had some money, but she was a brilliant talent, poet, author, lyricist, songwriter, and she wasn't just those things. She could actually sell them and people wanted to buy them. She was very successful. She worked mostly with, or largely with, Harper's Weekly, a periodical big at that time. One day she's sitting and she's reading the newspaper, and here is an interview with McClellan. The usual dribble, and then he ends it with, all quiet along the Potomac. Well, she switches over to the next page, and there's this little drab of an article, and it's about a soldier, a Union soldier, who he was on picket duty the night before, and he was killed by a Confederate's sharpshooter. But it didn't say anything. But one of the things it says that the article pushed was, it was only a private, don't worry, no officers were killed. And that just burned her britches. So she goes home and she writes this poem. She originally called it The Picket Guard, but it became known as All Quiet Along the Potomac. And she gave, because this was fictitious, but she gave this guy a wife, 2 children, and the fact that when he died, it was the children he was thinking of. And who's to say? He may very well, if he had 2 children, I don't know. He went back to Harper's Weekly. They published it in November of 1861, so very early. And it was a big hit. Now, it's just a poem at this point. 1862, late in 1862, there was some loser rebel soldier in the Carolinas who walked up to a gentleman who was known as a fine songwriter, a popular songwriter in the Carolinas, and said, I have a poem here that I wrote when I was stationed in Virginia, and I think we can make some money if we put music to these words. So the guy looked at it, and he was impressed. Well, he should have been impressed. It was written by Mrs. Beers, not by this clown. So they put music to it. It was a big hit. So what got worse is somebody up north stole it too, put their names on it. Everyone's making money except the person that wrote it.
Yeah.
So Harper's Weekly was disgusted with it. We're in a time in our country where copyrights were routinely stolen. You had no recourse. You could go to court, but you'd never win. Well, they wrote an editorial, scathing editorial, but it didn't go anywhere. Anyway, it's a huge hit. The war ends 1865, and this song continues to be a favorite. You've got to remember, with a much smaller country, everybody was affected by this war. It was a catastrophe. Every family was touched. So the music, and the music from the Civil War, is some of the greatest in our country's history. So they kept singing it. And songs became popular, and they were sung routinely into the 60s and 70s. This was one of them. So it's 1867, and the people from Harper's Weekly called Mrs. Beers in for a meeting. They said, Mrs. Beers, do you realize you have lost tens of thousands of dollars in royalties from a song that you wrote? You've got to do something. Now, suing never really worked, but she sued. She was a pretty determined woman. She sued and she won. First time in our nature's history. And as a result of that, it was so resounding, it got so much attention, that in 1870, Congress pushed through the first copyright laws with teeth.
Wow.
So anyone who has written a song, a book, or anything, owes their livelihood to Mrs. Beers. Well, through the 70s, she continues to be, 60s, 70s, she continues to be popular. She's still a young woman, relatively. And one day, a publisher came in to visit her and said, Mrs. Beers, you're very popular, and we have an idea that would really service your fans. What we would like to do is put an anthology of all your most favorite works in one book. And your fans will love it, and we'll both make money. And all you have to do is say yes. But she didn't say yes, and they were shocked. And the reason they were shocked was her reason was, gentlemen, I'm a very superstitious woman. And I've had dreams that if I did things like this, my life would end early. There was nothing they could do to change her mind. But they kept coming back periodically, and they kept at her. Finally, in 1879, they wore her out. And she says, okay, let's do this. They called it All Quiet Along the Potomac, after her most famous piece. And on October 9th, 1879, this anthology was published. On October 10th, 1879, 52-year-old Ethel Beers dropped dead.
Man.
Sometimes you gotta listen to your gut. You know?
Yeah, I'm not listening.
Excuse me. I talk so much I need water.
I should be so worried about it. She moved herself there.
All quiet along the Potomac tonight, except now and then a stray picket was shot as he marched on his route to and fro by a rifleman hid in the thicket. It's nothing, a private or two, now and then. They won't count in the news of the battle. Not an officer lost, only one other man. Laying out all alone, a death rattle. All quiet along the Potomac tonight, while the soldiers are peacefully careening their tents in the rays of the clear autumn moon. Smoke from the bonfire is gleaming with a tremulous sigh as the gentle night wind through the forest leaves slowly is creeping, and the stars are up above and the glittering eyes. Guard well, for the army is sleeping. There's only the track of the lone sentry's walk as he marches from the rocks to the fountain. And slowly his feet would go over the field of a rock tired out on the mountain. This rock fell down and the horses cried loud as the soldier took quickly dreaming. Eyes with a tremulous heart. Oh, cry out for the soldiers a dreaming. And he pulls his sleeve roughly over his eyes to wipe away tears that were swelling, and pulling his gun close to his breast to push down the tears that were welling. Then he pushes the forest, the blasted pine tree, and the people so silently looking till the shadows of the forest and his glistening eyes. As the soldier peacefully dreaming. Thank you.
She was worried about that. She took herself Western.
I'm sorry?
The lady, one day, she wound up being worried about it. She died from being worried.
Right. Of course. Self-fulfilling prophecy.
You got it.
This next tune, you're going to know. You're going to know it by a different title and different words. There was a gentleman named William Fosdick. He grew up with a wealthy family in Cincinnati, Ohio. And he ended up, as he grew up and he went for education, he went to, well, don't laugh, but Transylvania College in Kentucky. It was a thing. And he ended up studying the law, graduated from college, set up a practice in Kentucky. And he did pretty well. So much so that 1851 found him in New York City with a large and successful law firm. But William was more than just a fine attorney. He could write music, and he was a poet. So he became an author. As a matter of, so he would lawyer in the day and the evening. And in the evening, what he would do is write. 1856 found him a published author. Hard to do, especially with a full-time job, but he did it. 1859, the firm was adding another partner. So they had a little gathering, so everybody could meet everybody and their wives. So this new gentleman came in, and his wife apparently was a knockout. She was blonde, blue-eyed, rosy cheeks, and her name was Oralee. So she was gorgeous. So what did William do that night? Well, what would anybody do with one of his co-workers' beautiful wives? Write a poem for her. And but it hit in New York City. Somebody added music, and we don't know who. But somebody added music. The music went up the Hudson River to West Point, and now we get to 1861, and the Civil War starts. So a lot of the professors and officers, cadets, resigned their commissions. They went south to fight for the Confederacy. But they took one thing with them. They took Oralee, which was extremely popular in the North now, took it to the South where it became an even bigger hit. So everyone was singing, the soldiers were singing this song. And it was so popular that it was sung for years and years. This song, Oralee, has appeared during the magic days of motion pictures. It's in movies. We move on to 100 years later, 1955. The king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, is doing another one of his truly horrible movies.
Unfortunately.
So they were doing one based in the Civil War. So so the producer said, let's get a song that was from the Civil War and put this in the movie. So they got Oralee. They changed the words and the title, and it became Love Me Tender. And it gave the king of rock and roll his second #1 hit. When the blackbird in the spring, 'neath the willow tree, sat and rocked, I heard him singing Oralee. Oralee, Oralee, maid of golden hair, sunshine came along with thee, olives in the air. And in thy blush the rose was born, music when you stayed, sunshine in thy eyes forlorn, sparkling sea rain. Oralee, Oralee, birds of crimson wing, never song was sung to thee as in that sweet, sweet spring. and I watch the roses pour music when you fade. In my eyes, your eyes are warm, sparkling, seem to pray. For me, made of golden hair. Sunshine came along with me, and swallows in the air. O'er me, birds of crimson wing. Never song has sung to thee as in thy sweet, sweet spring.
Elvis didn't like his own movies.
His
Elvis did not like his.
No, he didn't. He wanted to do real things. And he had that Svengali. Just, okay. This next one was a great song of abolition. And it was written by a man named Benjamin Hamby. He was born in 1933, 34, in a place called Rushville, Ohio. Now, Rushville, Ohio is significant because it's just above the border from Kentucky. Kentucky, well, we're talking about now the 1840s. So Kentucky was a slave state, and even though it never left in the 1860s, when it never left the Union, it remained a slave state, of course, until the end of the war. When he was 9 years old, in the early 40s, he ran into a gentleman named Joe Selby. Joe Selby was an escaped slave from Kentucky. And he was in very bad shape from exposure. So the town took him in. A lot of abolitionists in Rushville. They took him in, and while he was trying to recover, he told them his story. He was a slave in a plantation in Kentucky, and he had a love, you know, the girl he was in love with called Nellie Gray. And they were both in love. They wanted to get married because you had to go and get permission from the master, which they got. So they are both preparing for their wedding day, just a couple of days away. And she, Nellie Gray, is taken and sold down to Georgia. He knew he would never see her again. And in those days, it was common knowledge, typically, the further south you went, the shorter your lifespan, the more horrible the conditions. So he knew he would never see her again, so he came up with a plan, because he could not accept that. He wanted to escape into Ohio, and then slide his way up to Canada, where he can be a free man. Earn enough money to go back down south as a free man, go back down south, and go to Georgia and find Nellie Gray. And he would buy her freedom, and then they would have the life they've always dreamed of, except only better because they would both be free. Unfortunately, he's telling this story, and the next day he died. He was just in too bad a condition. So Benjamin, the years passed, and Benjamin goes to Westerville. He went to school. And as he's going to school, he never really forgot Joe Selby and Nellie Gray. When he finished, Ben Hamby was a very talented songwriter and musician, and that's how he was going to make his living. But after college, he took a break and he went down to Kentucky just on a trip, and he ended up at a slave auction, which he had never seen before. But he saw it. Of course, he knew about them, but he saw it, and Joe Selby and Nellie Gray came rushing back to him. So that when he went back home, first thing he did is he sat there and he wrote this song, which was inspired by Nellie Gray. It's called Darling Nellie Gray. This song became a huge hit. This is 1854. A huge hit in the North, and brought many people on board to being anti-slavery. It was a big, big song. And he went on, later on, the war's over, and one day, Nellie Gray's father shows up at his door. He knew of the song, tracked him down, but her father never knew what happened to her. As a matter of fact, he died in the Westerville, which was where Benjamin was living. See, he died. Benjamin went on to be a very popular songwriter and musician. That's how he made his living. And so much so that he wrote another song that all of us have sung around the holidays, Up on the Housetop. So he ran the gamut, abolition and Christmas. He also wrote Silver Bells. I'm kidding about that. That was 100 years later. This is Nellie Gray. There's a low green valley by the old Kentucky shore, I'd while many happy hours away. Just to sit by the little cabin door where lived my darling Nellie Gray. Ah, poor Nellie Gray, they've taken you away, and I'll never see my darling anymore. I'm sitting by the river, and I'm weeping all the day, farewell to the old Kentucky shore. Now the moon had climbed the mountain, and the stars were shining too. I went to see my Nellie Gray. We'd go on down the river in my little red canoe, and my banjo sweetly it would play. One night I went to see her, but she's gone, the neighbors say. The white men have wrapped her in their chains. They're taking her to Georgia to wear her life away while working in the cotton campaign. Ah, poor Nellie Gray, they've taken her away, and I'll never see my darling anymore. I'm sitting by the river, and I'm weeping all the day, so I'll stay here by the old Kentucky shore. Now my canoe is underwater, and my banjo is unstrung, and I'm tired of living anymore. My face is looking downward, and my song it goes unsung, farewell to the old Kentucky shore. They've taken her away, and I'll never see my darling anymore. I'm sitting by the river, and I'm weeping all the day, farewell to the old Kentucky shore. Now my eyes are getting blinded, and I cannot find my way. Hark, there's a knocking at the door, and I hear the angels calling, and I see my Nellie Gray, farewell to the old Kentucky shore. Ah, no, Nellie Gray, in heaven there they say, and I'll never lose my darling anymore. For I'm coming, 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 as the angels clear the way, farewell to the old Kentucky shore. Yes, I'm coming, 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 while the angels clear the way, farewell to the old Kentucky shore. Thank you.
That's a story.
I promised I wouldn't keep you here more than 4 hours tonight. So
That's okay. I'm waiting.
I'm kidding. That's when things start to get thrown. In February of 1862, President Lincoln and his wife Mary had a personal tragedy. Their beloved son Willie died of fever. Probably, most people say probably from a bad water supply at the White House. they were desolate and destroyed, especially Mary, who almost went insane. So just a few miles down the road, really, in Baltimore, a young, talented, on-the-rise soprano named Angeline Patty was giving a concert in that very town. When the concert was over, she was approached by people from the Lincoln White House. And they explained what had happened to the Lincolns. And she wondered if Angeline and her piano player would come up to Washington and play a private concert for them to lift their spirits, of course. Of course she said yes. So Angelina Patty was, I'm underselling how good she was. She was born in Madrid, Spain in 1843 to two Italian parents who were in opera. And when she was 6 years old, they realized she had a brilliant gift. So they moved to the United States, to New York City, to get her training. By the time she was 16, she was in the New York Opera Club. By the time she was 18, she was on the road and highly in demand. So now she's 20 years old, performing for the President of the United States. And she's doing him a favor. So that's something. At this time, at 20 years old, she's married to an older man who was acting as her manager. Now, it quickly became obvious the only thing he brought to the table was the fact that he was losing all her money. So she replaced him, not just as manager, but as husband. So he was gone, and she managed her affairs for the rest of her life. By the time she was 80 years old, no, by the time it was 1880, she was one of the richest women in the world. By the time it was 1870, she was one of the most acclaimed soprano singers in the world, and she traveled the globe singing for people everywhere. She eventually settled in Wales. Well, she did this concert for the Lincolns, and it was very emotional. And at the end, President Lincoln had a request. He said, "Do you know the song Home Sweet Home?" Very popular song at the time. And she said she did, and she would be happy to do it. Home Sweet Home being written by an American, Joe Howard, in 1823. It was part of an opera. The opera didn't succeed, but that song did, and it caught on. By the 1850s, this was an extremely popular song all over the world, and everybody sang it. Now, I don't know if you've ever looked at the words of it. It is a very maudlin song. It's a very sad song of somebody who's away from home and longing for it, and longing for his mother. So you can see where soldiers would be singing this song in camp. And it got to be a double-edged sword, because as the soldiers would all sing this in camp, you wake up in the morning to be a lot less soldiers. They would just go home. So this song was, this was not allowed. A lot of the commanders said no, no more Home Sweet Home. Well, she became as popular as you could possibly be. She was a brilliant shooting star, and she died in 1919. She gave her last concert in 1917. Again, very wealthy, and she was living in Wales. So from Wales, she went up to England, where the Buffalo Bill Wild West show was performing. And she enjoyed it, but she was seen spending at least a half an hour talking to Annie Oakley, who was a big star, young girl, becoming a big star, one of the biggest attractions in the show, telling her how to keep unscrupulous men from taking her money from her.
Oh.
Through treasures and palaces, no matter where we roam, we did ever so humble, there's no place like home. Are the stars in the sky seem to have us here, but see through the world there's no place like home. How I gaze at the moon while I tread the dreary wild, and I feel that my mother is dreaming of her child. She watches that moon from the little cabin door, and through the woodbine fragrances never cheery no more. Home, sweet, sweet home, there's no place like home. There's no place like home. Be it ever so long, there's no place like home. Pardon me?
I said, heard the song, but now I understand why.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see why a soldier would be singing this.
And why he was leaving.
Yeah. Now this next tune, I'm sure you know it, everybody knows it. It's When Johnny Comes Marching Home. Now, the average person, and you people are not average, you are history people, you are a cut above. We all are. When Johnny Comes Marching Home, if you ask the average person, and you know how well young people know history these days, so that's a joy. Who do you think sang that song? The average person would say that was a Confederate song, because Johnny Reb is what they call Confederate soldiers. It's not true. It is a Union song that eventually became extremely popular and sung by both sides. Now, 1863, a couple of things happened. The war was not going well for the Union. However, they had a breakthrough. Vicksburg and Gettysburg, very close together. And the average person in the country is thinking, this war's got to be just about over. There is no way the South can endure. You got to believe the people in the South were saying the same thing. In other words, get this darn thing over with. Didn't quite happen. And no less than Annie Gilmore. Annie Gilmore was an 18-year-old woman in Boston, Massachusetts. She was engaged. She was engaged to a Union officer named Captain John O'Rourke. Now, he was out in the field, he was fighting. And they were engaged, and she could not wait, because this means my wedding is going to happen now. And it didn't, because the war didn't end. But she was so sure of it, she went to her brother, Patrick Gilmore, and said, could you write a song celebrating my betrothed's coming home? And he did. Now, they were Irish immigrants, came over in the early 1850s, and John was just not some guy around the block. He was in charge, he was in the Army, and he was in charge of every regiment's band in the state of Massachusetts, so that's something. He was renowned as an arranger, as a conductor, and he was a great horn player, and as a songwriter. So he wrote this. So he dug back into his Irish past, and there was an anti-war song called Johnny, I Hardly Knew You. And he took that song, and he wrote these words. And it's, as we know now, When Johnny Comes Marching Home. Well, Captain John O'Rourke came home when the war ended in 1865, and they didn't get married for 12 years. Yeah, that song was just sitting there. And they moved to Nebraska, Plattsburgh, Nebraska, where O'Rourke became postmaster and dabbled in politics. They never had any children, and they lived there for the rest of their lives. That house is still there. It's on the historical register, and there's a plaque out front. Mr. and Mrs. John O'Rourke, this is the home of Mr. and Mrs. John O'Rourke, who inspired the writing of When Johnny Comes Marching Home. hurrah, hurrah. We'll give 'em a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer, the boys will shout, the ladies, they will all turn out and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. The old church bells will peal with joy, hurrah, hurrah. We'll welcome home our darling boy, hurrah, hurrah. The reindeers and lots to say with roses, they will stream away and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. Ready for the Jubilee, hurrah, hurrah. We'll cheer our heroes 3 times, hurrah, hurrah. And the laurel wreath is ready now to place upon his royal brow. We'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah. We'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer, the boys will shout, the ladies they will all turn out, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. Ba-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Okay, we're ready. I think we'll do one more. This is, to me, the greatest song to come out of the Civil War, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Great song, great song. And, but this song goes back a ways.
Yeah.
It goes back a ways, but back in the early 1800s, when they were having the tent revivals, like down in Georgia, supposedly Methodist ministers, a lot of them, and they would have the altar calls. All of that, this is one of the songs they sang. Of course, the words were different. It was, brother, will you come with me? And that song just kept going on, and the melody is so beautiful and so stirring, people kept taking it as their own, changing the words. It became the #1 marching tune in the United States Army. Now, I say United States Army because there was no Confederacy through this time, and they called it John Brown. Now, what most people don't realize is there were 2 John Browns. They think of John Brown, the great abolitionist who took over Harper's Ferry in 1859, 1860, and he was captured by Robert E. Lee, by the way, Captain Robert E. Lee from the United States Army, and he was hung. It wasn't him. That was later. This was actually, there was a John Brown. He was a Scottish immigrant, and he was supposedly the worst soldier you ever saw. So they had words which I don't have at this point. They had words, he would march, he'd go left, he would go right. That sort of, sit down, he'd stand up. He didn't know what he was doing. So the song was about him. Until, bless you, until Harper's Ferry. When that John Brown, the abolitionist, was grabbed, and they started writing words about him. All they did is add it onto the original John Brown, and then originally the original John Brown was left out, and they just started singing John Brown's Body, which is pretty gruesome. John Brown's body is a moldering in the grave. That's real bright, right? So that was kind of known. But that same tune was, people were marching to it. It's a great marching tune. 1819, a young lady, Julia Ward, was born in New York City. Julia Ward, who became Julia Ward Howe, was a force of nature. She eventually married. She married her husband, who came from money, and he thought he was getting, he made a big mistake. He thought he was getting a woman from the 19th century, and he was wrong. He was getting a woman from the 21st century. They clashed. They had children. They were living in Massachusetts. They clashed. There were separations, always a battle. She was a spectacular poet, a songwriter, and she would write plays. There was nothing she couldn't do, but what really did it for her is she was an activist, very active in the abolitionist movement. very big in that. She was a speaker. She was not somebody that was called on. She was the person up front. Women's suffrage. There wasn't anything she wasn't involved in. As a matter of fact, many years later, did you know Julia Ward Howe's husband was one of the group of six, they called them, who financed John Brown's rampage to try and start, he was trying to start a race war. He was trying to get the slaves to rise up. And he was, so that's, those six people, of which her husband was one of them, would meet every October, 4 years, until her husband died. And at that point, she took his place. She's the reason there's a Mother's Day. She went before Congress. She made an emotional plea. She didn't get her way because she was a woman. Eventually, a man got it through. There wasn't anything she really couldn't do. Well, she's with her husband. The war breaks out. They're in Washington because he's doing the U.S. Sanitary Commission. So they're inspecting the camps to see if they're clean enough. By those standards, I don't know. But there was a traveling party, and while he's doing his work and he's inspecting the camps, she's walking down the streets in Washington with her friends and maybe her children. And here comes a Union regiment dressed to the nines, marching to John Brown's body. Now, if they were McClellan's army, they were only probably marching back to camp and going to bed. They weren't going anywhere. Anyway, John Brown and all of that I just sang. And her friend said, Julia, surely you can take that stirring tune and put better words to it. And she says, you know, Julia says, I really always have wanted to, but I think I'll give it a try, at some point. Well, believe it or not, and this happens with the great people, she went to bed that night. And in her words, Julia's words, I awoke in the gray of early dawn, when much to my surprise, the wished-for words were forming themselves in my brain. I lie there for a while longer as the final verses came together. And then I said to myself, I need to write this down, or this will be gone in the morning. So I hurried over to my desk, and the pen was flying across the paper, barely touching it. And then I went back to bed and to sleep, but not before thinking something remarkable had just happened. And it did. It's a tremendous song. Wow. Much loved by Lincoln. Of course, it didn't come out till later on. But though this was still kind of early, 1862, it came out. It was published. But the country was already divided. You move up to, over to Ohio, the Reverend Charles Cardwell, Methodist minister, very talented man, mesmerizing speaker, beautiful singer, very much like myself. Anyway, he was so talented that the church sent him out on the road to raise money. He was their star. Unfortunately, the war came. He's the chaplain for the 121st Ohio, and he was captured during a battle. Ends up in Libby Prison in Richmond. Horrible place to be. But as you can imagine, how good could it be? They're losing the war. It's nothing but despair in that building. And the Confederates couldn't feed or clothe their own soldiers. So what are they going to do for people under their guard? Well, at some point, Vicksburg and Gettysburg happened. And just prior to that, somebody had slipped a Philadelphia newspaper into his cell. And newspapers were a little bit different back then. They were just as vile. People who think this sort of thing has been invented now, they need to go back, even to the time of George Washington, really bad stuff. But they would print short stories and poems and song lyrics. So there were the song lyrics of Julia Ward Howe, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Now, he wouldn't know what that would be, except on the bottom it said, sung to the tune of John Brown's body. So he's a great singer, he's looking for something to do, so he memorizes this, and he taught as many people as wanted to. Then came the news of Vicksburg and Gettysburg, and this place of depression, where you couldn't get any more, exploded. Eyewitnesses said it was as if the roof came off of Libby Prison. Everyone who knew the words, and everybody knows the words to the refrain, Glory, Hallelujah, sang this to the top of their lungs. So eventually he's exchanged in a prisoner exchange, and Cardwell goes back to doing what he did. He ends up in Washington for the Christian Commission meeting in Washington in the Capitol building. So there's congressmen, senators, and then in the very back, President Abraham Lincoln snuck in at the back of the hall. Cardwell gets up, and he's giving his speech, and the people are going, they're mesmerized. He has them in the palm of his hand. And he finished his presentation, like he always finished his presentations, by singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic in that beautiful tenor voice. Now, you hear these stories and what's to come, and some of these are true, some of these aren't, except there were eyewitnesses, one of which was the grown daughter of Julia Ward Howe, Laura Richards, was present. And she said those hardened yet patriotic statesmen were so moved, they were singing along. They all stood and screamed and shouted this song as loud as they could. So finally we're coming to the end of the song, the dramatic end. As the song's wearing down, the high, reedy, Western voice of Abraham Lincoln is heard to exclaim, "Sing it again." This is the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Feel free to sing with me if you like. Truth is marching, 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 truth is marching on. My eyes have seen the glory of the crying out the Lord. He's trampling out the vintage men where the grapes are wrapped in spoil. His roots is faithful lightning with a terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. I have seen him in the watchfire of 100 factory hands. We had built and given all to him in the evening news and dance. We applied his righteous sentence by the grim and daring lance. Our day is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. He is sounding forth the trumpet, but you never call retreat. He's singing out the hearts of men beneath his judgment seat. I can strip my soul answer and be jubilant my feet, while God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Thank you very much. Well, that's it for tonight. If anybody has any questions, but not the question of why don't you stop singing? That would be rude. Yes.
I have a question on the Battle Hymn of the Republic
Yes.
and Dixie. And when they're sung together, they call it the American Trilogy. What is the third song?
Yeah.
Hush, little baby, don't you... This is the other song. I don't know the name of it. Don't you cry, I know your daddy's bound to die. That's the song you're thinking of.
Wow.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And Dixie, you probably know this,
Yeah.
who I'm talking to, thought of this, the theme song of the Confederacy, and it was, that and the Bonnie Blue Flag were really the theme songs. But Dixie, of course, was not a Confederate song. Dan Emmett wrote it in 1859 in New York City, where he was there with his minstrel group performing at a facility, and the guy directing the facility says, Dan, we need another song. So he wrote Dixie. Has nothing to do with the Civil War. And in Dan's words, if I would have known that the Rebs were going to use it, I would never have written the damn thing.
Great.
Anybody else?
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Anybody wants a brochure? I got my other programs too.
Oh,
All
God.
right, well, thank you again, Don, for the concert
Oh,
and the
gosh.
stories. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Please take a cookie on your way out. But just to let you know of a few more things coming up. Next week, you don't have to come here at all unless you want to. So we have a week off from our events, but we are picking back up in July with force. July 11th, Thursday at 7 p.m. is our next trivia, and we're going to do it on the Declaration of Independence. So come by and test your knowledge on that. I'll try not to make it too difficult, but I say that every time, and it always gets, people always tell me, I didn't know that. So then Saturday, July 13th, we have a former Batavia resident unwell, Anthony Terrell from New York City, will be coming to talk about his newest works that he's completed that may or may not make their way to Batavia at some point, but he created 2 giant murals for a show down in New York City, so he's going to talk about those and his time here in Batavia. Then we've got July 19th, which is a Friday, and it's going to be at 2 p.m., so a little different time, but David Riley, if you've been reading the Batavian, you read his articles. He wrote a book about growing up in Batavia in the 1950s and 1960s, so he's going to be talking about his time here in Batavia and those stories that he shares in his book, which we have in the gift shop. And then July 20th, we're bringing back our artifact preservation series. So Tyler, our curator, will be doing a preservation workshop on how you can take care of your family photos and family photo albums. So that'll be at 11 o'clock. Goes for about an hour, but could go longer, who knows. So if you're interested in that, or if you've got a lot of old photos laying around and want to know how best to keep them, we'll help you out with that. Then our next guest speaker will be, well, after that one, will be July 24th. And I think this crowd will like it. We have Kevin Pollock coming all the way from Prince William County in Virginia, but he's a Western New Yorker natively. He'll be talking about Western New York units and soldiers at Bull Run. Charles Rand, our most famous example there, so we will be making reference to that. So that'll be at 7 o'clock that night. And then, well, she's in the audience, so I better talk about her. We're starting up a Kids Saturday program, and Joyce will be actually doing that for us. The first one will be on early school, so kids can come and learn how they would have had to deal with school if they went back in the early 1800s. So we're very excited to bring some of those programs back up and running. And Java with Joe, Tyler will be doing it, so that'll be the 25th. And again, perfect for this audience, he's going to be talking about women's spies during the Civil War. So that one should be very cool. He was telling me some of the stories he's found, and it'll blow your mind. So, so be sure to come and check that out. But as always, you can find everything on our website, on Facebook. Yes, Joyce?
The 17th, I'm presenting the Baker Brothers.
Yes. There you go. See, there's just so much going on around here.
I gotta write them down.
That's for the round table, right?
The Baker Boys of Stafford.
But at the round table, right?
No,
Here. For genealogy, right?
No.
No?
For you. July 17th.
That's one, Ronnie.
See, there's so much going on, I don't even know everything. So, make sure that that's etched in my brain now. So, see, there's just so much going on. Check it all out. We hope to see you again. Thank you for coming out, and we'll see you next time.
Well, the whole thing is.